Last week, one of the pro members shared a website that really stood out, and at the time I'm recording this, it's also listed under awards nominees. I've got a feeling it's going to be featured as site of the day pretty soon. The reason becomes obvious the moment you land on the site. The animations are incredibly well done, but the one that really caught my eye was this scroll-driven stroke animation. The illustrations are bold, the layout is playful, but what stood out most was how dynamic the scroll experience feels. As you move down the page, a large, curved stroke flows through the layout, connecting each section in a way that feels both chaotic and controlled, adding this playful, narrative rhythm to the design. This kind of scroll-driven stroke animation is something we have seen on quite a few award-winning sites, but MindMarket pulls it off especially well with its expressive art direction. Since we have never covered this type of animation on the channel, I thought it would be a great opportunity to break it down and show you how to recreate the effect in under 20 lines of GSAP. So for the demo, I put together a super minimal landing page with the same kind of SVG stroke animation fully synced to scroll. It's built using HTML, CSS, and just a few lines of JavaScript with GSAP and ScrollTrigger. In this video, I'll walk you through the full setup step by step. If you find these kinds of ripples helpful, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you'd like to access the source code for this project, along with hundreds of other similar micro projects and a brand new website template every month, you can check out the pro membership via the link in the description. Alright, let's jump into the code. Before we get into the code, let's take a quick look at the assets I'm using for this demo. The illustrations you saw earlier are from FreePic. I'll leave a link in the description in case you want to use the same ones while building along. Now for the main part, the SVG path that gets animated on scroll. I created this stroke in Figma using the pen tool. You can just draw a basic path and use the bend tool to shape the curves however you like. You'll probably need to adjust the positioning and length based on your layout and content just to make sure it flows well through the sections. You can tweak the stroke color and thickness directly in Figma or later in the HTML. For this video, I am using this path I already made, but once you have got yours ready, just right click on it and choose copy as SVG. In the next section, I'll show you exactly where that goes in the HTML. With the assets ready, let's start setting up the page structure. Alright, there are going to be three main sections, an intro at the top, a spotlight section in the middle, and an outro at the end. In both the intro and outro, I'm just dropping an H1 element with some placeholder text just to give the page a simple visual starting and ending point for the scroll experience. Then, inside the spotlight section, I'll add 4 rows. Each row is just a div with the class name row, and this is where all the main content will go. Next, I'll go ahead and start filling in the rows. In the first one, I'm adding an image. It's wrapped inside a container with the class image. In the next 2 rows, I'm adding a bit more structure. Each row has some dummy content with a heading, a short paragraph, and an image on the opposite side. The layout alternates, so the text and visuals switch sides as you scroll just to keep it visually interesting. And in the last row, I'm placing another image, same setup as the first, inside a div with the class image. It doesn't really matter what content you use here, this is just to give us something to scroll through while the animation plays in the background. Finally, after all 4 rows, I'll paste the SVG path we created earlier in Figma. This is the curved stroke that will animate with GSAP. I'm wrapping it in a container so it's easier to position later with CSS. That's all we need for the HTML structure. Now let's move on to the styling. First of all, I'll bring in the Mangrove font from Google Fonts. This is going to be the primary typeface across the whole page. Then I'll set up a few base colors using CSS variables. This will help keep everything consistent and make it easy to switch colors later if needed. Next, I'll reset the default spacing and box model just to make sure we are starting with a clean layout. This setup removes all browser defaults like margins and paddings and applies border box sizing to all elements so padding doesn't affect overall dimensions. Now for the base styling, I'll apply the Mangrove font to the entire body. Set the background to a soft light tone and use a dark color for the text just to keep things clean and readable. For the headings, I'll define some shared styles. I'm keeping them bold with tight line spacing to give the layout a modern and editorial feel. The main H1 headings will be larger and slightly condensed, while H2s will be a bit smaller but visually strong. paragraph text is also styled with a bit of weight so it doesn't feel too light on the page. Next, I'll style the images. I am making sure they always fill their containers and maintain their aspect ratio so they never get stretched or distorted. After that, I'll style the intro and outro sections. These are the full height blocks at the top and bottom of the page. Its content is centered both vertically and horizontally with a light background color to contrast against the middle section. Each heading is also centered and kept at a readable width so it doesn't stretch too far across the screen. Now I'll move on to the spotlight section. This is where all the scroll content lives. I'll make a vertical stack with space between each row, and I'm adding some padding around the edges. The overflow is hidden here so the SVG stroke doesn't spill outside its container when we animate it later. Each row is set up using Flexbox with content side by side and spacing between the columns. Inside each row, the text and image are wrapped in separate containers. This gives us full control over alignment and layout for each piece of content. For the first and last rows, the ones that only contain images, I'll give those image containers a more compact width so they don't stretch too wide across the screen. Then, I'll style the card components. Each card has a background color to separate it from the page, a bit of padding, rounded corners, and some space between the heading and paragraph inside. Now, I'll position the SVG path. It sits absolutely in the background of the spotlight section, centered horizontally, pushed slightly down from the top, and stretched wide enough to cover the full area. I am also sending it behind all the content using a negative Z index and making sure it scales with the layout by setting it to full width. Next, I'll add some responsive styles for smaller screens. First, I'll reduce the font sizes slightly and reset the letter spacing so the text doesn't feel too tight. The headings in the intro and outro will also stretch across the full width to use space more efficiently on mobile. Inside the spotlight section, I'll reduce the spacing between rows and stack each row vertically instead of side by side. This makes sure the layout adapts cleanly to narrow screens. For the rows that only had images, I'll expand those images to full width so they don't feel too small on mobile. Same goes for the cards. I'll make them span the full width of the screen to improve readability. And finally, I'll adjust the size and position of the SVG path so it still covers the scrollable area on smaller devices while keeping it centered in the background. That's it for the styling. Next, I'll move on to the JavaScript and start wiring up the scroll animation. I'll start by importing libraries we'll be using. First, I'm bringing in GSAP along with the ScrollTrigger plugin. That's what we'll use to sync the animation to scroll. Then I'm importing Lennis, which is a small library that adds smooth scrolling to the page and works really well alongside GSAP. After that, I'll register the ScrollTrigger plugin with GSAP so we can use it later. Now, I'll wait for the page to fully load by adding an event listener for DOM content loaded event. Once everything is ready, we can safely start initializing our scroll behavior. The first thing I'll do inside this block is set up Lennis. This part is just a small snippet I've taken directly from the Lennis documentation, and it basically connects Lennis with GSAP's internal ticker. That way, every time the page scrolls, Lennis updates the scroll position and keeps everything smooth and in sync with ScrollTrigger. Now we are ready to animate the SVG stroke. I'll grab a reference to the SVG path we copied earlier from Figma using its ID. This is the curved line we pasted into the HTML, and it's the element we'll animate as the user scrolls. To animate a stroke like this, we first need to measure how long the entire path is. We can do that using a built-in method called getTotalLength that gives us the total length of the stroke from start to end as a number, which we'll use to control how much of it is visible at any given time. Next, I'll set two important stroke properties on the path. Stroke-array, which defines how long the dashes are. In our case, we want the dash to be as long as the entire path. The second is stroke-offset, which hides the dash by offsetting it fully from view. So at this point, the stroke is technically there, but it's completely hidden and ready to be revealed through animation. Now, I'll create a GSAP twin that animates the scroll from fully hidden to fully visible. All I'm doing is changing the stroke dash offset value from full length down to 0, which makes the stroke look like it's being drawn in real time. To sync this with scroll, I'll attach a scroll trigger to the animation. Here's what it does. The trigger is set to the spotlight section. That's the part of the page where we want the animation to happen. The animation starts when the spotlight section hits the top of the viewport and ends when its bottom hits the bottom of the viewport. And by setting scrub to true, the animation is linked directly to the scroll position, so it progresses smoothly as you scroll rather than playing on its own. That's all we need for the JavaScript. The result is a scroll synced stroke animation that draws the SVG path as you move through the page, fully smooth, fully responsive, and built in just a few lines of code. Hope you found the video helpful. See you in the next one.